There was nothing extraordinary about the morning Elijah Carter and his family left for San Francisco, except perhaps the way the sunlight lingered just a little longer on the edges of their luggage. It was the kind of morning that felt like a clean page, promising something hopeful, something smooth. Elijah, always a man of measured optimism, clung to that promise as he checked his watch and adjusted the cuff of his charcoal blazer. The black town car waited curbside outside their stone-front home in Decatur, Georgia. Camille, his wife of 22 years, emerged from the front door with the confidence of a courtroom veteran, poised, graceful, and composed, even in travel flats. Their 17-year-old son Isaiah trailed behind, earbuds in, phone in hand, camera bag strapped across his shoulder. He was tall for his age, with thoughtful eyes that hadn't yet learned how to look away from injustice. They weren't just any family heading to the airport. Elijah was set to keynote one of the most prestigious neuroscience symposiums in the country. His research on degenerative brain disorders had been hailed as groundbreaking, and the conference in San Francisco would be a milestone not just in his career, but for the very communities that had long been left out of such halls. First-class tickets had been booked weeks in advance. Elijah insisted on it, not for the luxury, but for the dignity. A man didn't rise from rural Mississippi, spend 3 decades defying every ceiling placed above him, only to settle for less. Camille had packed with the meticulousness of a litigator. Isaiah's suit was steamed. Her digital boarding passes were saved, printed, and backed up in 2 cloud drives. Elijah carried his lucky blue tie, the same one he wore during his first research grant pitch, tucked neatly into the outside pocket of his carry-on. Everything about the morning had been orderly, calm, even serene, until Terminal C. As they entered the main terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson, Elijah felt it, the intangible shift. Maybe it was the subtle silence when they approached the first-class counter, or the way the gate agent, a woman with stiff blonde hair and a name tag that read Kendra, glanced up and then down again too quickly. Camille noticed it too. Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the boarding passes tightened ever so slightly. "Good morning," Elijah offered with polite warmth, sliding the passports and tickets across the counter. Kendra didn't return the greeting. She scanned the passes, then frowned. She muttered, fingers tapping rapidly against the keyboard. Her lips pressed into a line, and she leaned closer to the monitor. Isaiah leaned toward Camille. "Is something wrong?" he asked in a whisper. Camille's hand found his wrist. "Probably just a system lag," she said, more for Kendra to hear than for Isaiah. Kendra straightened abruptly. "It seems your reservation is in economy. Rows 32A, B, and C," she said crisply, without looking up. Silence clamped around them like a vice. "That's impossible," Elijah replied, measured but firm. "We booked first class, weeks ago. You should see confirmation numbers ending in 4 and 48. Kendra didn't flinch. "I can only tell you what the system shows. If there's an issue, you'll need to step aside so I can assist the next passenger." It wasn't the words that stung. It was the tone, the presumptive finality, as if she'd been waiting for this moment to flex the kind of power that didn't come from a title, but from an ingrained belief that certain people didn't belong in certain seats. Camille's expression shifted by a fraction, just enough for Isaiah to recognize the battle forming behind her lawyer's gaze. She placed a hand on the counter, slow and deliberate. "My husband is Dr. Elijah Carter. He is the keynote speaker at the International Neurodegenerative Conference. These seats were not just purchased. They were paid for, confirmed, and reconfirmed with seat assignments 1A, 1B, and 1C. I have the emails. Would you like to see them?" Kendra's mouth twitched. "Ma'am, I'm not calling you a liar." "You just did," Camille interrupted, her voice calm as ice over fire. "When you invalidate confirmed seats with no verification, you call our integrity into question. That is the definition of an accusation." A few heads turned. The couple behind them, an older white man in a navy jacket and a woman in pearls, shifted uncomfortably. A businessman glanced up from his laptop, sensing the static in the air. Elijah remained quiet. He had learned that dignity often spoke louder in silence than fury ever could. But Isaiah was still learning. "They always do this," he murmured, just barely loud enough for his mother to hear. They always act like we don't belong. Camille's eyes flickered to her son, then back to Kendra. You have 10 seconds to produce your supervisor, she said evenly. There was a beat of stillness. Then Kendra clicked her intercom. Bryce to Gate C14, please. Supervisor to Gate C14. Isaiah looked up at his father. Why does this happen even when we do everything right? Elijah exhaled slowly, willing the old anger to stay buried just a moment longer. Because rightness doesn't always protect you, he said softly, but we stand anyway. Just then, the unmistakable sound of a cane tapping lightly against tile echoed from the nearby seating area. A woman with silvery white hair and a tailored Chanel suit stood slowly and made her way toward the gate. Her face was elegant but stern, and her voice when she spoke cut through the tension like a conductor's baton. I do believe, she said gently, that this family is being treated quite differently from others I've seen in line today. Heads turned. Even Kendra froze. The woman's name tag, now visible under the light, read, Mrs. Eleanor Hastings. And just like that, a new kind of reckoning began. For a moment, no one spoke. Mrs. Eleanor Hastings stood tall despite the curve in her spine and the weight of years visible in the slight tremble of her wrist. Her cane, carved mahogany with an ivory handle, tapped twice more on the floor. Deliberate, steady. The silence in Terminal C had become electric, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Kendra's face froze into a porcelain mask, the kind worn by those caught red-handed but too proud to retreat. Her voice, brittle and taut, cracked under the weight of Eleanor's quiet authority. Ma'am, this matter is being handled. I would ask you not to interfere. Eleanor raised a gloved hand, palm out. Young lady, I have been flying out of this terminal since before you were born. And I have seen this same story unfold 100 different ways in 100 different airports. Her eyes swept the room with the sharp clarity of a former professor who once commanded lecture halls. Only now, instead of calling it what it is, we pretend it's a computer glitch. Camille's lips curved into the faintest flicker of a smile. Not amusement, but recognition. This wasn't a woman simply offering support. This was someone who had come prepared to speak the truth where silence had too often prevailed. Kendra shifted uncomfortably, her posture stiffening further. I'm simply following protocol. No, Eleanor interrupted. You're following a pattern, one that's easy to miss unless you've lived long enough to chart it. I once taught statistics at Emory University. Bias may come dressed in the garb of system errors and seat reassignments, but the data never lies. Passengers of color, especially in premium cabins, face these so-called glitches far more often than others. And I can promise you this, when enough of us start noticing the pattern, even the most polite lies fall apart. A ripple of murmurs spread through the line of passengers. Some looked away, feigning distraction. Others leaned in, eyes wide, watching the unexpected confrontation unfold like a scene from a courtroom drama. Elijah glanced at Camille. She gave a slight nod, signaling what he already knew. This wasn't the moment to shrink back. Mrs. Hastings, Elijah said respectfully, your presence here means more than you know. Eleanor turned to face him directly. Her gaze softened. Dr. Carter, I've followed your research for years. I lost my husband to Alzheimer's. Your work is extraordinary. Elijah's breath caught in his throat, not at the compliment, but at the weight behind it. In that moment, he saw her not as a bystander, but as someone whose life, like his, had been shaped by loss, perseverance, and the unshakable need to bear witness. I'm sorry for your loss, he said gently. And I'm sorry for she replied, gesturing subtly to the indignity unfolding. Because that's what this is, a theft, not a seat, but with respect, of recognition. At that moment, the supervisor arrived. Bryce McAllister was a tall man in his early 40s, his suit too tight at the shoulders and his name tag slightly tilted. He exuded the forced cheer of someone used to diffusing situations with corporate apologies and hollow smiles. But even he hesitated when he stepped into the sphere of tension. What seems to be the issue here? He asked, voice light. Camille didn't waste time. We have 3 first-class tickets, confirmed. Your agent has insisted that the system now shows us in economy, without explanation. We have digital receipts, email confirmations, and seat assignments. And this isn't the first time this has happened, to us or others. Bryce glanced at Kendra, who stood stone-faced but rattled. "I'll need to check the system myself," he said, stepping behind the counter. Isaiah, who had been quiet since Mrs. Hastings appeared, now looked at his father and asked the question again, this time louder. "Why do they keep doing this to us?" The words rang out, not in anger, but in raw clarity, unfiltered, teenage honesty. And this time, it wasn't just his parents who heard. It was every passenger within earshot, every bystander, every silent witness. Elijah placed a steadying hand on his son's shoulder. "Because, Isaiah, some people confuse appearance with worth. But that's why we stand tall. That's why we speak." From behind the counter, Bryce's voice emerged. "There does appear to be a mismatch between the boarding passes and the seating chart." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. First class is now conveniently full?" Bryce hesitated. "That's correct." "You'll move someone," Eleanor said firmly. "Preferably the one who created this situation to begin with." "I'm afraid that's not how the system works," Bryce replied quickly, but his tone lacked conviction. "Then change the system," Camille snapped, her composure still intact, but her patience worn thin. "We didn't ask for privilege. We demanded fairness. You denied it. And now we're being asked to settle for less because it's convenient for you." Elijah pulled out his phone. "Do you want to see the timestamps? The confirmation codes? The full payment receipt?" "No need," Bryce muttered. "We'll resolve this." There was a pause, a stillness that crackled like lightning waiting to strike. And then Bryce made the call. "Gate reconfiguration," he said into his headset. "Please release seats 1A through 1C to confirm passenger Carter." A collective hush swept through the gate. No one applauded, but something in the air shifted, a reckoning not yet finished, but now undeniably begun. As the boarding announcement chimed and the Carters gathered their things, Eleanor leaned into Isaiah and whispered, "Your question about why they keep doing this? The better question is, what will you do when it happens again? Because it will. And what you say next will matter more than you think." Isaiah nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the moment. As the family stepped toward the jet bridge, Elijah turned to Eleanor. "Would you join us for dinner after the conference? I'd like to hear more about your time at Emory." Eleanor smiled, the kind that reached through decades. "I'd be honored." And with that, they boarded, not as victims, but as a family refusing to be made small. What began as a quiet morning had turned into a defiant declaration. And the sky, waiting beyond the glass, no longer seemed so far. The walk down the jet bridge was not a walk at all. It was a procession. Elijah Carter led, his frame upright, shoulders back, not in arrogance, but in the quiet command of someone who had earned his place long before anyone tried to deny it. Camille followed close behind, her stride purposeful, controlled. Isaiah walked between them, not entirely understanding the power of the moment, but feeling it nonetheless. Each step echoed with something unspoken, something that could not be reduced to boarding passes or policy errors. Behind them, Mrs. Eleanor Hastings paused just before stepping onto the jet bridge. She turned her gaze toward the terminal, where a few passengers still watched, some with guilt, others with awe, and a few with something close to shame. Her cane tapped once more, and then she continued forward. The flight attendant stationed at the door, a young woman with clipped blonde hair and a corporate perfect smile, brightened as they approached. "Welcome aboard. First class is to your left." Her eyes scanned their faces, then flicked to Eleanor. "May I assist you with your bag, ma'am?" Eleanor shook her head. "I'm quite capable," she replied, though her voice was gentle. "But thank you for asking." Inside the cabin, the air smelled faintly of citrus and leather. There was a kind of deceptive calm in first class. Here the illusion of order could be preserved even as the world unraveled outside the cabin door. Elijah tucked his carry-on into the overhead bin above seat 1A, placed his briefcase neatly beneath, and sat down slowly. Camille settled beside him in 1B, crossing her legs and immediately pulling out her tablet. Her fingers didn't move yet. They hovered over the screen, waiting. Her face remained composed, but Elijah could read the tension in her jaw. He knew she wasn't reviewing contracts. She was replaying the gate scene in her mind, cataloging it, preparing the case file, not just in the legal sense, but in the emotional one too. Isaiah took seat 1C. He didn't recline. He didn't plug in his headphones. He just sat, staring forward. Across the aisle, Mrs. Hastings took 2A with a delicate sigh, smoothing her navy skirt and adjusting the soft scarf around her neck. "I suppose it's only fair to admit," she said softly to Elijah over the top of her seat, "that I usually travel quietly, but some mornings don't permit silence." Elijah smiled faintly. This morning didn't ask. It demanded. Just then, the silver-haired man from earlier, the one who had muttered about those people slowing down the line, entered the cabin. His expression soured when he saw the Carters already seated. He blinked, clearly confused, perhaps even disoriented by the fact that the system had ultimately upheld their presence in a space he had assumed did not belong to them. His gaze landed on Isaiah, then quickly darted away. Camille noticed. She didn't speak, didn't flinch, but she did reach across Elijah and lightly place her hand over his. Elijah squeezed it once. The plane door shut with a hydraulic hiss. Overhead bins clicked into place, and the plane began to back away from the gate. Still, no one had exhaled. 30 minutes into the flight, the mood inside the cabin had relaxed, but the residue of what happened at Gate C14 clung to Elijah's mind like a fog refusing to lift. The clink of glassware and the soft rustle of menus passed between rows, but he hardly noticed. He sat with his tray table down, not for food, but for space, to spread out the materials for his keynote address. Graphs, diagrams, handwritten annotations. But the words blurred, and none of them felt sufficient anymore. "How do I talk about the brain," he murmured to Camille, "when my soul is still burning?" She looked over at him, her voice quiet but resolute. "You don't compartmentalize it, you use it." He nodded slowly. "That's not what I planned to say on that stage." "It never is," she replied. Just then, Isaiah removed his headphones and turned toward them. "I think I want to write about it," he said quietly. Elijah turned. "About what happened?" Isaiah nodded. "Not to shame them, just to remember. I feel like if I don't, it's like pretending it didn't matter." Elijah stared at his son, his throat tightening. This wasn't just a father watching his child process injustice. This was a legacy unfolding in real time. "I think you should," Elijah said. "Write it, speak it. Whatever form it takes, don't let it get buried." Isaiah gave a small nod, more to himself than anyone else. Toward the end of the meal service, Mrs. Hastings leaned over the aisle and spoke just loud enough for the family to hear. "I taught thousands of students in my life," she said, her voice lined with memory. "But I only regret the days I chose to stay silent." Camille turned to her. "You did more than speak today. You shifted something." "I hope so," Eleanor replied. "But if I'm honest, I think your son shifted more than I did. That question he asked at the gate, that was the hinge on which the whole moment turned." Isaiah blinked. "What question?" "The one you asked your father," Eleanor said, smiling softly. "Why do they keep doing this to us?" It wasn't a question, it was a mirror. There was a pause. Isaiah looked out the window. Below them, the clouds looked like torn silk. The sky stretched endlessly in every direction. When the flight attendant returned with dessert options and champagne, Camille declined, Elijah waved it away, and Isaiah simply said, "Just water, thanks." But Eleanor accepted the glass of champagne and raised it slightly, not in celebration, but in declaration. "To dignity," she said softly. "May it never be negotiable." No one clinked glasses, but everyone at that row, black and white, young and old, felt the toast ripple through them like a quiet wave. The rest of the flight passed without incident, but the silence wasn't emptiness. It was endurance. A pause. The kind that comes after the storm, but before the rebuilding. And somewhere between Atlanta and San Francisco, the Carters, through resolve, restraint, and the quiet defiance of staying seated, had reclaimed something that no gate agent, no error code, and no bias could take away. Their place, their voice, their name. The wheels touched down at San Francisco International Airport with a muted thud, a jolt just strong enough to snap Elijah Carter out of the fog of his thoughts. His hands, still resting on the closed folder of keynote materials, hadn't moved since he last glanced at slide number 12. The familiar rhythm of touchdown, breaks, silence, collective breath, usually brought him peace. But not today. The flight attendant's voice crackled gently over the intercom. Welcome to San Francisco. Local time is 10:43 a.m., and the weather is a mild 64 degrees. We ask that you remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. Camille was already packing away her tablet, her movements efficient and brisk. But Elijah noticed the tension in her shoulders hadn't eased since they left Atlanta. He turned slightly to Isaiah, who had just pulled out his phone and was scrolling through notifications with a stunned expression. Something wrong? Elijah asked. Isaiah didn't look up. Dad, it's everywhere. What is? He turned the screen so Elijah could see. A video, grainy, vertical, unmistakably filmed at Gate C14, was already posted across 3 major social platforms. The caption read, "Black family with first-class tickets forced to justify themselves. An elderly white woman calls it out. This needs to stop." Elijah's heart clenched. The video began with Kendra's dismissive voice, then shifted to Camille calmly demanding a supervisor. It caught Isaiah's whispered question. It caught Eleanor's words. And most damningly, it caught Bryce's reluctant concession the moment the injustice had been undone, not by protocol, but by pressure. As the camera zoomed out, the entire terminal could be seen pausing, watching, and silently complicit. How many views? Camille asked sharply, leaning over to see. Isaiah refreshed the page. Almost 1.2 million in 2 hours. There are reposts with subtitles. News accounts are sharing it now. It's gone global. For a moment, no one said a word. Elijah's instinct, honed through years of walking tightropes in elite institutions, was to retreat, to control the narrative before it controlled him. But something in him rebelled this time. Let them watch, he said. Camille looked at him. Are you sure? No. He exhaled slowly. But I'm tired of being sure in a system that's never sure of me. In the arrivals terminal, the family moved quietly through the crowd. There were no signs, no press, no confrontation, just a few sidelong glances and a hushed energy in the air, like people had begun to recognize them, even if they didn't say it aloud. As they waited for their luggage near Carousel 6, Camille's phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. She hesitated, then opened it. Mrs. Carter, this is Thomas Whitaker, VP of Customer Experience at Summit Air. I'd like to offer a personal apology and speak at your earliest convenience. We are aware of the situation at Gate C14. She handed the phone to Elijah. He read it once, twice, then handed it back. He's rattled. Damage control, she said. No doubt. But, she added, lowering her voice, they're scared of this one. This isn't a private complaint they can bury with a generic reply. They know this has legs. Isaiah was now watching the video again, but this time reading the comment section. Dad, people are defending you. A lot of them. Of course they are, Elijah said. It's human decency. Isaiah looked up. No, I mean, white people too. Strangers, professors, journalists, even flight attendants from other airlines are chiming in. Elijah blinked. The news hadn't fully sunk in until that moment. This wasn't just a post. This wasn't just a moment. This was a movement. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the glittering skyline of San Francisco, Elijah stood by the window in their hotel suite overlooking Nob Hill. He had removed his blazer and tie, but not the weight pressing into his chest. Across the room, Camille sat on the couch, her legs folded beneath her, reviewing a document on her tablet. The reflection of the video flickered faintly across her face. Her expression remained unreadable, but her eyes were sharp with purpose. Isaiah sat at the table nearby, laptop open, not playing games, not on social media. He was writing. Elijah, Camille said suddenly. Whitaker emailed again. He's asking for a Zoom call. He says they've opened an internal investigation. Wants to apologize publicly. Elijah didn't answer right away. He kept his gaze on the city. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker on, dotting the hills like constellations drawn into stone. Do we take it? She asked, setting down the tablet. Only, he said, if we set the terms. Camille leaned back. You want retribution. I want accountability, he said quietly. Retribution implies vengeance. I'm not interested in vengeance. I'm interested in consequences that mean something. And if they just offer more sky miles, then we make them wish they hadn't. She smiled for the first time that day. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. Later that night, the three of them sat together in the dim hotel lounge, a quiet fire crackling in the corner. Mrs. Eleanor Hastings had accepted their invitation for a late dinner, and now sat sipping a cup of chamomile tea with the air of someone who had seen too many cycles of history to be surprised by another one. You know, she said thoughtfully, I've seen revolutions born from less than a child's whispered question. Isaiah shifted in his seat. I didn't mean to start anything. You didn't, she said. You simply reminded the world that some things haven't changed, and that reminder, spoken by someone your age, is harder to ignore than all the eloquent speeches in the world. Camille leaned in. What would you do if it were your family, Eleanor? If your name were on every headline tomorrow? Mrs. Hastings didn't hesitate. I'd use it. I'd force them to answer. And I'd do it publicly, because exposure is a disinfectant. It doesn't always cure, but it always reveals. Elijah nodded slowly, turning toward Isaiah. Looks like we've got work to do. Isaiah closed his laptop, nodded back. Then let's get to it. And in that shared silence, deeper than any press release, more powerful than any apology, a decision was made. Tomorrow they would answer that call from Summit Air. But this time, they wouldn't speak as passengers. They would speak as a movement. By 9 a.m. the next morning, the conference halls of the Moscone Center were already humming with anticipation. Inside Ballroom D, final preparations were underway for Elijah Carter's keynote session, with tech teams checking audio feeds and volunteers arranging programs across rows of tiered seating. But Elijah wasn't there yet. He sat at the edge of the hotel suite's living room, laptop open, shirt pressed, tie undone, waiting for the video call that would set the tone not only for his day, but potentially for a national conversation. Camille paced just behind him, phone in hand, her lawyer's instincts sharpening by the second. Isaiah stood at the kitchenette counter, pouring juice he wouldn't drink. The incoming Zoom notification flashed. Thomas Whitaker is waiting to join. Elijah inhaled once, then clicked, accept. The screen opened to reveal a well-lit corporate office and a middle-aged man in a crisp white shirt, shoulders slightly hunched in the stiff posture of someone about to deliver bad news to someone smarter than him. Behind him stood a backdrop of the Summit Air logo, a blue horizon over silver wings, a symbol that now, ironically, evoked not freedom, but boundaries. Good morning, Dr. Carter. Mrs. Carter, Whitaker began, his voice professional but tinged with genuine tension. Thank you for making time for us. First and foremost, I want to express our deepest apologies for the experience your family endured at Hartsfield-Jackson. It was unacceptable on every level. Camille folded her arms. Your email referred to it as a misunderstanding. Whitaker cleared his throat. Yes, that was the initial language. But after reviewing the footage and the internal data logs, it's clear this wasn't a simple technical issue. And what do you believe it was? Elijah asked calmly, but directly. A human failure, Whitaker replied. One rooted in bias. Whether implicit or deliberate, it violated our policies and your rights as passengers. That's why the employees involved have been placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation. There was a pause. Elijah nodded once. Go on. We are launching a third-party audit of all seat reassignments and boarding disputes over the last 12 months, with a particular focus on racial disparities in premium seating. Additionally, we'd like to offer your family full refunds, lifetime platinum status with Summit Air, and 100,000 sky miles each. But more than that, he leaned forward slightly. We'd like to formally invite you to serve as external advisors in the development of our new anti-discrimination protocol. Camille exchanged a look with Elijah. It was not a shock, it was strategy. You don't just want to make this right, she said. You want cover, a partnership, something that looks like reform? Whitaker didn't flinch. We want change, and we recognize that we cannot do it credibly without voices like yours helping shape it. Isaiah, who had remained silent, suddenly spoke. Will Kendra ever get to do that to someone again? The question hung in the air. Whitaker's expression shifted. There will be consequences. What they are, I can't yet disclose, but I assure you this won't be swept under the rug. Elijah leaned forward now, his voice low, deliberate. Then here's what we expect in return. Transparency, measurable outcomes, a public statement acknowledging the role bias played, not an apology, but an admission, and a commitment to publish quarterly data on passenger complaints and resolution timelines. Whitaker nodded slowly. We can work with that. One more thing, Camille added, her voice like velvet wrapped around a blade. The name Eleanor Hastings better be etched into your employee training program. Her courage deserves institutional memory. A faint smile ghosted across Whitaker's lips. Understood. The call ended not with a handshake, but with a silent understanding. The air had shifted. This wasn't customer service. This was negotiation. An hour later, Elijah stood backstage at the Moscone Center, adjusting the same tie that had once graced the cover of Scientific American. The room beyond the curtain was filled. Scientists, students, journalists, and even a few cameras, not because of his title, but because of what the world now knew. Camille squeezed his hand. Make them remember. He nodded. As he stepped to the podium, applause broke out. Not thunderous, but sustained. Earnest. Elijah waited for silence. Then with calm precision he began. Alzheimer's disease doesn't just steal memory, he said. It steals futures, identities, dignity. Click, click, cameras. But dignity is not only the subject of disease, it is also at the heart of equity. And that is something I must address before we talk data. He paused. Yesterday my family was told without basis that our first-class tickets were somehow invalid, that our place in a space we paid for was negotiable, that perhaps our presence required further proof. Whispers, stillness, gravity. I'm here today not only as a researcher, but as a father, a husband, a black man in America. And what I want this community, this room full of brilliant minds to understand is that systemic bias doesn't just impact criminal justice or voting rights. It seeps into every institution, including ours. From the wings, Camille watched with something deeper than pride, conviction. This wasn't a man protecting a reputation. This was a man redefining legacy. Back at the hotel that evening, Elijah found himself flooded with messages from colleagues, civil rights leaders, and strangers from around the world. Some were simply notes of solidarity. Others were invitations. More were testimonials from people who had faced the same thing, but didn't know what to do next. Isaiah scrolled through the replies to a tweet he'd posted. My dad didn't raise his voice. He raised his standard. That's how change starts. It had been shared over 50,000 times in 3 hours. Looks like people want more than an apology, Isaiah said. They want a plan, Elijah replied. They want proof someone's listening. Then we give them that. Just before bed, Camille placed a sheet of notes beside Elijah. What's this? He asked. Draft outline for the public policy proposal. I figured we'd give Summit Air a blueprint before they go fishing for consultants. He smiled. You never stop. I can't afford to, she said. None of us can. And as the lights dimmed and the city exhaled beneath them, the Carter family prepared for what lay ahead, not as passengers reclaiming seats, but as voices reclaiming power. 3 days after the Summit Air incident, the Carters no longer moved through airports anonymously, not in the hotel lobby, where bellhops glanced twice before whispering, not at the cafe across from the Moscone Center, where a barista shyly passed Isaiah a napkin that read, Thank you for what you said, and certainly not during Elijah's second panel appearance, where his nameplate was flanked by 2 cameras and a CNN producer, scribbling questions for the next segment of the Situation Room. The world wasn't just watching, it was waiting for the Carters to say more, to push further, to name names, demand resignations, and file lawsuits. But Elijah wasn't interested in spectacle. Not yet. He was interested in change. The media offers poured in like a monsoon. 60 Minutes, NPR, a New York Times op-ed request. Camille sorted them by tone and intent, drawing neat columns with a red pen. Outrage-driven, platform building, token feature, legitimate dialogue. They agreed to one. A live interview with Marcia Owens, a respected journalist whose work had toppled mayors and exposed systemic abuses across public institutions. Camille read Marcia's email aloud. We don't want to sensationalize. We want to understand why a prestigious Black family with indisputable documentation is forced to defend their right to exist in a premium space, and what it says about who we still are. Elijah looked at Camille. Do we speak now? Camille folded her arms. If we don't, someone else will, and they won't tell the whole story. The interview aired nationally on a Sunday evening. It opened with footage from the gate, the video that had now passed 12 million views across platforms. Marcia Owens then welcomed Elijah and Camille to the table, seated in front of a deep navy backdrop, soft lighting cutting gently across their faces. She didn't waste time. Dr. Carter, you're a pioneer in neurological science. You've graced the covers of research journals, served on the boards of Ivy League institutions, and yet, in an airport terminal, your name and work meant nothing. How do you explain that? Elijah didn't blink. Because racism doesn't recognize credentials. It's not about facts, it's about fear. Camille added, it's about who people instinctively believe belongs and who they believe must prove their presence. The interview moved like a courtroom, calm, deliberate, revealing. When Marcia asked, what do you want to happen next? Camille laid it out like a verdict. A public audit of premium class reassignments over 5 years. Transparency in complaint handling. Mandatory anti-bias training for all frontline airline staff, with accountability tied to performance. And a requirement that passenger disputes be handled by a rotating ethics officer, not just a gate agent's discretion. The nation listened. The hashtags trended. The emails poured in. And Summit Air's board called an emergency meeting. That night, Camille stood by the window in their suite while Elijah sat at the edge of the bed, removing his watch. She was quiet. He watched her reflection. What is it? I keep wondering, she said softly, if any of this would have happened if Eleanor hadn't spoken. Elijah nodded. Probably not, Camille exhaled. That bothers me more than it should. We shouldn't have needed validation to be believed. But we did, he said, and we still do. And that's the problem. Elijah stood, walked over, and took her hand. Then let's make this the last time we need it. The following morning, while eating a quiet breakfast in the hotel's atrium cafe, Isaiah spotted a man in a pressed gray suit approaching them with hesitance and haste. I think that's someone from the airline, Isaiah murmured. Camille looked up. Elijah folded his napkin slowly. The man stopped a few feet from their table. Dr. and Mrs. Carter, I'm Robert Hensley, Executive Counsel for Summit Air. I'm here on behalf of the board. Camille gave a tight smile. We're having breakfast, Mr. Hensley. Understood. I won't stay long. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. We want to propose a closed-door mediation, no legal filing, a formal agreement. You'd guide the policy reform, and in return, we settle financially with substantial discretion. Camille's eyes narrowed. Discretion? We'd prefer if media attention tapered off, he admitted. A quieter resolution? Elijah raised an eyebrow. So we absorb the pain, and you walk away looking reformed. I wouldn't put it that way. But that's what you meant. Camille leaned in. We don't need discretion. We need consequences. And we won't trade silence for cash. Not now. Not after the voices we've heard. Hensley stood stiffly. If you reconsider, Camille held up a hand. If you reconsider truth over image, you know how to find us. He walked away. Isaiah grinned. That was the most corporate way I've ever seen someone get wrecked. Elijah smiled, but his face sobered quickly. They're scared of us now. And they should be, Camille added. By the end of the week, the Washington Post ran a full-length piece. They paid for first class. The airline made them earn it anyway. Subheadline, How One Family's Refusal to Stay Silent Sparked a Corporate Reckoning. Eleanor Hastings was quoted at length. I watched a young man ask his father why this keeps happening, and I realized the answer isn't just in data, it's in who speaks up when they see it. My only regret is that I waited 70 years to do so. She was now being invited to speak at aviation conferences and equity forums, and, at Camille's insistence, had a clause written into Summit Air's revised training policy named after her. the Hastings provision. On the flight home to Atlanta, the Carters boarded through the same gate they'd been humiliated in just 10 days earlier. But this time, it wasn't Kendra behind the counter. It was a young black woman with kind eyes who looked up at the screen, recognized the names, and whispered, "Thank you." Elijah nodded. "We're just getting started." As the plane took off, Isaiah stared out the window. "Do you think it'll last?" he asked. "The change?" Camille looked at Elijah. He looked at the sky. "I don't know," he said, "but it'll outlast the silence." And sometimes that was enough. The Carter home was quiet, but not still. Camille moved between the kitchen and her home office with the steady rhythm of a woman used to drafting legal briefs between laundry cycles. Elijah sat in his study, surrounded by stacks of scientific journals and 3 unopened envelopes from networks asking him to continue the conversation. And upstairs, Isaiah worked on his college essay, a piece no longer about a photography career, but about what happens when truth collides with silence. The national attention hadn't slowed. It had grown sharper, more focused. Civil rights organizations had begun citing their story and policy demands. A senator from Massachusetts had referenced the Carter incident during a committee hearing on transportation equity. But as the Carters quickly learned, attention was not always protection. It began with a letter, delivered not by email but through a certified courier. Thick cream paper, embossed with a gold insignia. The letterhead read, "From the Office of Institutional Risk and Legal Strategy, Summit Air Holdings." Camille read the letter aloud as Elijah stood behind her. "Dear Dr. and Mrs. Carter, in light of recent events and after careful legal consultation, Summit Air has determined that certain public characterizations of its employees and operations may constitute defamation under Section 230 of Corporate Image Protection Law." Camille stopped reading. Her jaw clenched. "They're threatening a defamation suit," she said flatly. Isaiah appeared at the doorway. "What?" "They're trying to scare us into silence," Elijah muttered. Camille dropped the letter onto the table like something toxic. "They want us to back down, to retract public comments, to cancel our collaboration offer, and they're doing it under the guise of protecting employee dignity." The irony is nauseating. Isaiah looked stunned. "So, now they feel humiliated?" "No," Camille corrected. "They feel exposed." The following morning, Camille called an emergency meeting with a longtime colleague, Lena Barrett, a renowned civil rights attorney who had spent 20 years dismantling systems with precision and zero tolerance for cowardice. Lena appeared on screen with her signature gray streak tied back and a sharp legal pad at her side. "I read the letter," she said without preamble. "It's a bluff, but a sophisticated one." Camille nodded. "I agree, but they're not just playing defense. They're building a case to paint us as overreactive, vindictive, opportunistic." Lena narrowed her eyes. "They're preparing for the court of public opinion." "Exactly." Isaiah sat off to the side but leaned in. "So what do we do?" "We answer," Lena said, "with light." That afternoon, the Carters released a public statement through their attorney's office. It was calm, precise, and devastating. "We remain committed to transparency, justice, and reform. Any efforts to silence public discourse through legal intimidation only confirm the need for the very changes we have been advocating. We did not ask to become a national symbol, but now that we are, we will not waste the opportunity to build something better. Dignity is not negotiable. Neither is truth." The statement went viral, but more than that, it sparked a counter-reaction from Summit Air's employees. A week later, Elijah received a secure email. Subject line, "You don't know me, but I work for Summit Air." The message was from a woman named Marissa Quinn, a mid-level operations analyst. She'd been watching quietly, documenting quietly, and now she was ready to speak. "I've been asked to alter incident logs, shift language, recode the boarding data to remove bias indicators. I've refused. I don't know who else to tell. But your story gave me courage. If you're building something real, I want to help." Camille read the email twice, then turned to Elijah. "She's our whistleblower." Elijah stared at the screen. "They're not just reacting. They're rewriting history. Not if we stop them first." 3 days later, with Lena's help, The Carters arranged a confidential meeting between Marissa and a federal transportation investigator. It took place in a private office in downtown Atlanta. Marissa arrived wearing dark glasses and a brown trench coat, visibly shaken but resolute. She brought a flash drive. Inside were over 40 incident reports altered in the last year. Cases of black and brown passengers reassigned from premium seating, nearly all later relabeled as inventory error or boarding mismatch. Camille's voice turned cold. It wasn't a glitch. It was policy. Lena leaned forward. Or at the very least, culture protected by willful blindness. That night, they filed an official whistleblower disclosure to the Department of Transportation. Within hours, the story leaked to the press. The fire that they thought Summit Air could bury now had federal oxygen. As the world reacted, the Carter family found themselves at another crossroads. Should they sue? Should they push for public hearings? Should Elijah delay his research to lead this movement full-time? Each path had costs. Camille paced for hours that evening, reviewing timelines, balancing the legal with the ethical. Isaiah watched from the stairs, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Finally, Elijah broke the stillness. We didn't ask for this battle, but now we're in it. We finish it. Camille stopped pacing. So we go all the way? He nodded. No more behind the scenes. The next morning, Elijah appeared on CBS's This Morning beside Marissa Quinn. Her face was blurred, but her voice was clear. They told me, make it go away. But I couldn't, because the next family might not have a voice, and the next child might not ask a question loud enough to be heard. By afternoon, 3 more internal employees reached out to the Carter family with additional stories. The FAA announced an inquiry, and a bipartisan group of senators requested hearings on racial bias in airline boarding practices. That night, Camille sat in bed beside Elijah. You know they'll come harder now, she said. Elijah nodded. So will we. Outside their window, Atlanta's skyline blinked in soft amber light. Below, the streets pulsed with quiet resilience. The battle had changed. The stakes had risen. But the Carters were no longer fighting for their seat. They were fighting for everyone who had ever been told, you don't belong. And this time, they were ready to prove they always had. The invitation arrived by courier, sealed in navy blue with a gold embossed crest from the United States Senate. You are hereby requested to testify before the Committee on Transportation and Public Accountability. Camille read it aloud, then looked up at Elijah. This isn't just a hearing, she said. It's history. He nodded slowly, his hands resting gently on the invitation. Then we speak for more than just ourselves. The Hart Senate Office Building, Washington, D.C., March 22, 10:02 a.m. A sea of cameras lined the marble foyer. Inside room 216, lawmakers whispered across the dais, assistants scurried with files, and the audience, media, advocates, lobbyists, buzzed with expectation. Centered at the witness table sat Elijah, Camille, and Marissa Quinn. Still under whistleblower protection but now named publicly, her courage no longer hidden behind blurred footage. Elijah adjusted his tie, the same lucky blue one that had seen him through job interviews, grant proposals, and gate confrontations alike. Camille wore a charcoal blazer and pearl earrings that once belonged to her grandmother, a woman who'd been denied service at a Woolworths counter in 1961. Now her granddaughter was about to speak into the congressional record. Senator Gabriela Ruiz, chair of the committee, opened the session. This is not merely about an airline, she said. It's about patterns, power, and what happens when dignity becomes conditional. She turned to Elijah. Dr. Carter, you have the floor. Elijah leaned forward, voice calm but unwavering. My family was denied access to seats we lawfully purchased, not because of paperwork, not because of policy, but because someone looked at our skin and decided we didn't belong, and the system backed her. Gasps rippled, a few heads lowered. But it didn't stop there, he continued. We later learned that dozens, perhaps hundreds, of similar incidents were buried under labels like inventory error. Thanks to Ms. Quinn, we now have proof that this wasn't a coincidence. It was culture. Camille followed. I've spent my career arguing in courtrooms, but nothing prepared me for having to argue for my family's humanity at a boarding gate. No law degree can shield you from that kind of silence, the kind that tells you, "You're not wanted here." She paused. "Well, we're here now, and we won't be silent anymore." Marissa Quinn's testimony was the most searing. Hands trembling, voice soft but clear, she described how she had been instructed to sanitize passenger conflict reports. "I was told to rewrite the reason codes, to remove mentions of passenger race, to replace complaint with passenger confusion. It was a digital form of gaslighting, and it happened again, and again, and again." The room went still, and then applause broke protocol. It rippled through the audience, spontaneous and defiant. Senator Ruiz tapped her gavel, but she was smiling. Outside the chamber, the press swarmed. Camille answered questions with precision. Elijah spoke with measured resolve. Marissa, shielded by a legal team, offered brief statements. But amid the chaos, Isaiah stood off to the side, phone in hand, capturing it all. He didn't post it right away. He waited, watching his parents command the room. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't about a seat on a plane. It was about who gets to sit at the table. That night, back in their hotel overlooking the National Mall, Camille scrolled through coverage. CNN, "Dignity Denied, a Family Stand Against Silent Bias." NBC, "From Boarding Pass to Capitol Hill, How the Carters Ignited a Movement." Vox, "Camille Carter's 5-point policy framework could reshape air travel accountability." But then the phone rang. Elijah answered. It was Lena Barrett. "They're trying to smear Marissa," she said, voice low and clipped. "Internal documents just leaked. Claims she was unstable, difficult to manage. Classic character assassination. But we know what this is." Camille's eyes hardened. "It's retaliation." Elijah put the phone on speaker. Lena continued. "We can preempt it. I've arranged for her to appear on the 60 Minutes this Sunday. Her story. Her terms." Camille nodded. "We'll prep her." "And Elijah," Lena added, "you've been requested to guest host a town hall at Emory next month. Topic, the currency of belonging." Elijah closed his eyes for a moment. Then, "We accept." Back in Atlanta, a quiet shift had begun. Summit Air's board issued a new directive. All discrimination-related incidents were to be escalated to a new independent review board, co-chaired by Camille Carter. Marissa was granted full whistleblower protection and later offered a role consulting on internal data ethics. She accepted. Elijah's keynote research at the Alzheimer's Consortium received a 70% spike in national attention, not because of pity, but because people finally listened and realized brilliance can live inside bodies that are too often dismissed before a single word is spoken. But not everything was a victory. Hate mail arrived. Anonymous threats, mischaracterizations on certain networks branding them race hustlers and elitist agitators. Camille printed them all. "Receipts," she said. "Every movement keeps a file." One rainy evening, as the family sat curled under throw blankets with hot tea, Isaiah broke the silence. "Do you think it'll last?" "What?" Elijah asked. "This wave, this energy, people caring." Camille placed her cup down carefully. "Only if we keep pushing. Movements don't last on momentum. They last in memory, on reminding people what they almost forgot again." Isaiah nodded, then reached for his journal. A new entry began to form. "They told us we didn't belong. We didn't argue. We arrived." 3 days later, Summit Air issued its first ever public equity report. It included acknowledgement of past disparities, revised accountability systems, a permanent passenger ombudsman office, an annual summit for fair skies, keynoted this year by Dr. Elijah Carter. A new generation of travelers began posting online photos with the hashtag #SeatMeLikeICame and tagging their stories of defiance and dignity. Among them was a post from a young woman boarding a flight from Detroit to New York. "First class, no incident, no looks, no whispers." That shouldn't be revolutionary, but today it is. Thanks to the Carters, thanks to Marissa, thanks to the truth. Back in Atlanta, Camille received an envelope. No return address. Inside, a simple note written in soft blue cursive. "I watched from the sidelines in 61. I didn't speak up. I do now. Thank you for letting silence die." EM, and tucked within it, a faded Woolworths receipt, dated April 4th, 1961, marked Service Denied. Camille held it to her chest, a lifetime between the two papers. One denial, one declaration, the distance between them? Justice. 3 weeks after the Senate hearing, the story was no longer just a headline. It was a syllabus topic at 2 Ivy League law schools. It was the subject of 3 airline boardroom summits. It was a TikTok trend under Shoshan belonging ISIS seat, and it was increasingly a headache for people who preferred injustice to stay politely hidden. Elijah Carter sat in the green room of a televised roundtable in New York, staring at the floor, hands clasped. The stage manager was counting down to the live broadcast, but his mind wasn't on the questions. It was on the memo Camille had received earlier that morning, a memo that hadn't been meant for public eyes, a memo that had now gone viral. It began as a routine anonymous drop to their attorney, Lena Barrett. The source? An internal Summit Air training document dated 6 months before the Carter incident. At first glance, it appeared innocuous, just another procedural brief for customer-facing employees. But nestled in the final 2 pages was a section labeled Managing Premium Cabin Tensions, High Sensitivity Profiles. It instructed agents to exercise additional verification when dealing with non-frequent flyers in premium cabins, specifically citing non-white travelers under 40 traveling alone or in groups without business credentials visibly displayed. Camille read the passage aloud 3 times before speaking. So they codified the suspicion. Isaiah stared in stunned silence. They trained them to do it. Elijah didn't say a word. His silence wasn't numbness, it was ignition. Within 12 hours, the memo had leaked across the internet. Headlines followed. New York Times, Summit Air Memo reveals racial profiling in training protocols. Reuters, whistleblower leak sparks FAA scrutiny into airline bias. The Guardian, when flying while black isn't just a fear, it's a policy. Senator Ruiz called an emergency press conference. Civil rights groups issued statements. And within 24 hours, airline stocks across the industry dipped 3.2%. But amid the uproar, the Carters stayed calm. This was the storm they prepared for. Camille called Lena. We need to go bigger. Lena agreed. Town hall? No, Camille said. We go federal. And just like that, they began drafting the Fair Skies Standard Act, a legislative proposal that would mandate third-party oversight of airline seating disputes, public transparency reports on discrimination complaints, and civil penalties for recurring offender corporations. We'll need allies, Elijah said. We already have them, Camille replied. We just haven't brought them together yet. 3 days later, the Carters hosted a private strategy summit in Atlanta. Guests included Marissa Quinn, now the head of passenger equity analytics, Eleanor Hastings attending by video from her home in Savannah. Lena Barrett is co-lead drafter of the Fair Skies legislation, a retired pilot who had faced retaliation for challenging bias, 2 flight attendants turned whistleblowers, a father whose teenage son had been told, "Those seats aren't for you," on a flight to Denver. They met in a windowed conference room inside Emory Law School, Camille's alma mater. At the front of the room, a single whiteboard carried the words, "What does justice in the sky look like?" Answers followed. When gate agents lose fear of punishment for doing what's right. When algorithms stop assuming bias is efficient. When a black child in seat 1A gets a juice box without a second glance. By the end of the session, a plan was set. Public launch of the Fair Skies Standard in 2 weeks. Town halls in 5 major cities. And a final demand, that Summit Air issue a formal apology to every passenger profiled under the leaked training document, starting with the Carters. But not everyone was applauding. 2 days later, a coordinated PR smear campaign began targeting Elijah and Camille. Anonymous posts claimed Elijah's research funding was under investigation. False. Another claimed Camille had once been fired from a law firm for aggression. Fabricated. It was fast, ruthless, calculated, and it only got worse. Late that night, Camille's email account was breached. A private draft letter she'd written to a friend about the emotional toll of the spotlight, frustrations, fatigue, fears, was leaked and distorted as proof the Carters were crumbling. Lena called immediately. "They're not trying to discredit your story," she said. "They're trying to exhaust your soul." Camille stared at her screen, expression unreadable. They're not ready for how tired I already was before this even began. Elijah didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch until dawn, the soft wind carrying the sound of distant traffic. Isaiah stepped out quietly with a blanket. "Can I sit?" Elijah nodded. They sat in silence for a long while. Then Isaiah asked, "Are we losing?" Elijah turned to him, eyes heavy but sure. "No, we're winning. That's why they're fighting dirty." He pointed to the eastern horizon, where the first light broke past the city. "You see that?" Isaiah nodded. "That's how change always arrives. Slow, then all at once." 2 days later, Summit Air's CEO resigned. A joint federal investigation with the FAA and the DOJ was announced, and Camille, flanked by civil rights leaders and aviation watchdogs, held a press conference in Atlanta, standing on the courthouse steps where her grandmother once protested. She began with 3 words: "We are not done." Then she lifted the original boarding passes, still printed, still marked 1A, 1B, and 1C, and said, "These were not just seats. They were symbols of what we paid for, what we earned, and what we refused to surrender. Every denied seat is a stolen moment of dignity, but not anymore. This ends now." The crowd erupted. That evening, back at home, Camille tucked a copy of the leaked memo into a manila folder and labeled it, "Evidence, the end of pretending." Elijah added it to the growing archive beside the Woolworths receipt, beside Marissa's flash drive, beside the worn napkin from the barista in San Francisco. Artifacts of a movement. Proof that once, quietly, then loudly, a family refused to shrink. And the world took note. 3 months after the training memo leaked, the American aviation industry was no longer the same. The newspapers called it the Carter effect. CNN called it turbulence turned truth. And on social media, it had a simpler name, the boarding pass revolution. But for Elijah and Camille Carter, they still called it what it had always been, an overdue reckoning. That morning, a crowd gathered at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, not for a flight delay, but for a dedication. A curtain was pulled back to reveal a new sign above Gate C14. It read, "The Carter Concourse," in honor of every voice that refused to be reassigned. Beneath the sign stood Senator Gabriela Ruiz, FAA administrators, airline executives, and the Carters, Elijah, Camille, and Isaiah, standing shoulder to shoulder in sharp navy suits and quiet pride. Camille took the podium first. 3 months ago, she began, a gate like this told us we didn't belong. She held up their original boarding passes. But today, with every reform that began at this very spot, I want to say clearly, we always belonged. And from now on, no one will be made to question their place because of how they look. Elijah stepped up next, his voice calm, deliberate. "We didn't set out to become symbols, but when injustice forces you to stand, you either speak or become complicit in your silence. If this story moved you, if you believe no one should have to defend their humanity just to take their seat, please share it. Dignity isn't a privilege. It's a birthright." 2 weeks after the dedication, the White House formally signed the Fair Skies Standard Act into federal law, mandating independent complaint review, public reporting of discrimination data, and penalties for repeat violators. Camille was appointed senior legal advisor to the Federal Civil Aviation Equity Council. Elijah led a national task force on bias and automation in passenger experience systems. And Isaiah, now a freshman in college, began work on his first full-length documentary, Boarding Truth. But some of the most powerful moments came quietly, off camera. Like the letter Camille received one morning, handwritten, no return address. "I'm Kendra. I was the gate agent that day. I've resigned. I've enrolled in diversity and ethics training. There's no apology big enough, but I hope one day, if I ever meet your family again, I won't be the same person." Camille didn't cry, but she folded the letter slowly. "We didn't just change policy," she said softly. "We're changing people." At the launch of the new mandatory airline training initiative, a new campaign was unveiled. Its slogan read, "See me, seat me. Acknowledgement is the beginning of accountability." Elijah addressed the crowd of airline CEOs, pilots, and gate agents. He spoke of the moment his son had once asked, "Why do they keep doing this to us?" Then paused and looked directly into the camera. That question changed a nation, and now it's our job to make sure no father ever has to answer it again. Soon after, Summit Air issued a historic statement. Not a press release, not a buried update, a televised apology from their newly appointed CEO, a black woman who had started her career as a flight attendant. She spoke with clarity and remorse. We don't just apologize to the Carter family, we apologize to every family who suffered in silence. From this day forward, we do not just fly, we listen. Months passed, and yet the ripples continued. Elijah and Camille were invited to Yale for a student exhibit on racial equity in travel. At the center of the gallery was a powerful black and white photograph. Isaiah, age 17, is standing at Gate C14, boarding pass in hand, eyes locked on the camera. The caption beneath it read, "He didn't yell, he didn't move, he stayed, and that was enough." Behind them, a young woman whispered, "I'll remember that look for the rest of my life." That night, back home in Atlanta, Camille poured Elijah a cup of tea. "You know what scares me the most?" she asked quietly. He looked up. "What?" "That I once believed staying silent would be easier." Elijah took her hand. "And now?" "Now I know. Silence may protect you from conflict, but it never protects you from injustice." Weeks later, a little black girl, no more than 7, walked up to a boarding gate in Charlotte. She wore a bright blue dress and held a spiral-bound notebook titled Flight Journal. The gate agent looked down and smiled. "Hi there. What's your name?" She grinned. "My name is Amira, and I have my seat." Moral of the story, a seat, a standard. This story wasn't just about a family. It was about a question, one asked softly in a crowded terminal. Why do they keep doing this to us? And from that single question came a storm of truth. Elijah and Camille Carter did not shout. They did not riot. They did not retaliate. They simply stood still. And in their stillness, they made the world move. Because sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is refusing to give up the seat you rightfully earned. Not just on a plane, but in the room, in the data, in the story, and most importantly, in the future. They reminded us all that dignity is not a reward. It's not granted by gate agents or revoked by systems. It is non-negotiable. And when ordinary people speak truth with grace and resolve, they don't just reclaim a seat, they redefine the standard.